Have you ever spent an entire weekend pulling weeds, only to come back 2 weeks later and find your garden looking exactly the same? If that sounds familiar, you're far from alone. Every year, millions of gardeners wage the same exhausting battle. They pull, dig, scrape, and clear their beds, believing they've finally won. Then, almost as if by magic, fresh weeds appear again. It can feel frustrating, discouraging, and even impossible to keep up. Here's the surprising part. In many cases, the problem isn't that gardeners aren't working hard enough. The real problem is that they're fighting weeds the wrong way. They're treating the symptoms instead of understanding the cause. The visible leaves are only a small part of the story. Many weeds have deep underground roots, creeping stems, underground storage organs, or thousands of dormant seeds waiting patiently beneath the soil surface. Removing what you can see often leaves behind everything the plant needs to start growing again. The good news is that successful natural weed control doesn't depend on expensive products or harsh chemicals. It depends on understanding how weeds grow, how they spread, and why different weeds require different strategies. Once you understand their life cycle, you'll stop fighting the same battle over and over and start preventing weeds before they become a serious problem. Today, we're going to explore proven, science-based methods used by experienced gardeners, organic growers, and horticultural professionals. These are practical techniques that work with nature rather than against it. You'll learn which methods are effective, when to use them, when to avoid them, and how combining several simple approaches creates lasting results. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some gardens remain remarkably weed-free with surprisingly little effort, while others require constant maintenance despite hours of hard work. Let's begin by understanding the enemy. The word weed often makes us think of unwanted plants invading flower beds or vegetable gardens. But from a botanical perspective, a weed isn't a special kind of plant. A weed is simply any plant growing where it isn't wanted. A dandelion growing in a wild meadow may provide nectar for pollinators and cause no problems at all. The same dandelion growing between rows of carrots competes for sunlight, nutrients, water, and space. This simple definition explains why weed management isn't about eliminating every wild plant. It's about reducing competition where your cultivated plants need the greatest advantage. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is assuming all weeds behave the same way. In reality, different weeds survive using completely different strategies. Some complete their entire life cycle in just a few months. Others spend 2 years developing before producing seeds. Some can survive for decades through underground root systems that continue spreading even when the visible plant disappears. If you don't understand which type you're dealing with, even the hardest work may produce disappointing results. Let's start with annual weeds. Annual weeds complete their entire life cycle in one growing season. They germinate from seed, grow rapidly, flower, produce seeds, and die. Examples include chickweed, lamb's quarters, common purslane, and many species that appear in vegetable gardens every spring. Although individual annual plants die after producing seed, they compensate by producing astonishing numbers of seeds. One healthy annual weed may release hundreds or even thousands of seeds before the season ends. Those seeds don't all germinate immediately. Instead, many become part of what's known as the soil seed bank. Think of the soil seed bank as a hidden storage vault filled with living seeds buried just beneath the surface. Some seeds sprout the following season. Others remain dormant for years, waiting until sunlight, moisture, soil disturbance, and temperature create ideal conditions. Here's an amazing fact. Research has shown that seeds of certain weed species can remain viable in the soil for decades under suitable conditions. While many common weed seeds survive only a few years, others are remarkably persistent, making long-term prevention just as important as immediate removal. This explains why digging deeply into neglected soil sometimes seems to create even more weeds. You're bringing long-buried seeds back toward the surface, where light, oxygen, and fluctuating temperatures stimulate germination. Experienced gardeners know this and avoid unnecessary deep cultivation whenever possible. Instead of repeatedly turning over the soil, they disturb only the areas needed for planting. That simple change often reduces future weed problems significantly. Now let's look at biennial weeds. Biennial weeds require 2 growing seasons to complete their life cycle. During the first year, they usually remain close to the ground, forming a low cluster of leaves, known as a rosette. At this stage, they're storing energy rather than producing flowers. In the second year, they send up a flowering stalk, produce seeds, and then die. Because they're alive for 2 seasons, removing them during the first year is often much easier than waiting until they've matured. Once flowering begins, time becomes critical. Even weeds that have been pulled from the ground may still finish developing seeds if they're left lying on moist soil. That's why experienced gardeners remove flowering weeds promptly and dispose of mature seed heads carefully rather than leaving them in planting beds. Now we come to the group that causes the greatest frustration: perennial weeds. These are the plants responsible for countless hours of repeated pulling with little apparent success. Unlike annuals, perennial weeds don't rely only on seeds. Many spread through underground rhizomes, creeping roots, bulbs, tubers, or other underground structures capable of producing entirely new shoots. Imagine an iceberg. The leaves above ground are only the visible portion. Beneath the soil lies an extensive underground network storing food reserves and producing new growth. When gardeners pull only the visible leaves, much of that underground system remains untouched. Within days or weeks, fresh shoots emerge from stored energy. This isn't because the plant is unusually stubborn. It's simply following its natural survival strategy. Canada thistle, bindweed, quackgrass, ground elder, and many other troublesome perennial weeds spread this way. Some underground rhizomes travel surprising distances beneath the soil before sending up new shoots several feet away from the original plant. That means removing one visible stem rarely removes the entire plant. Here's another fascinating fact. Some perennial weeds can regenerate from surprisingly small pieces of root left in the ground. During cultivation, chopping roots into many fragments may accidentally multiply the problem, instead of solving it. That's why identifying perennial weeds early and removing as much of the root system as possible is so important. It also explains why persistence matters more than force. Repeatedly removing new shoots eventually weakens many perennial weeds because every new leaf requires energy from underground reserves. If those leaves are removed before they can replenish the roots through photosynthesis, the stored reserves gradually decline. This process takes patience. There are no overnight solutions. But understanding how perennial weeds survive transforms frustration into strategy. Instead of wondering why weeds keep returning, you'll recognize exactly what the plant is trying to accomplish and how to interrupt its life cycle naturally. Now that we understand the 3 major categories of weeds and why they behave so differently, we're ready to explore the first group of natural control methods that experienced gardeners rely on year after year. As you'll soon discover, timing often matters even more than effort, and one simple habit can prevent thousands of future weeds before they ever have the chance to grow. Understanding weed biology is the foundation of successful weed control, but knowledge alone doesn't clear a garden. The next step is learning when to act. One of the biggest differences between experienced gardeners and beginners isn't strength or endurance, it's timing. A weed removed at the right moment may take only a few seconds to eliminate. The same weed left untouched for another month could require a shovel, repeated digging, and years of follow-up maintenance. Let's start with the oldest and still one of the most effective weed control methods ever developed: hand removal. Pulling weeds by hand may seem simple, but there is a right way and a wrong way to do it. The ideal time is shortly after rain or irrigation, when the soil is moist but not waterlogged. Moist soil releases roots much more easily than dry, compacted ground. Trying to pull weeds from hard, Dry soil often causes stems to snap while the roots remain safely underground, ready to regrow. For annual weeds, removing the entire root is helpful, but even if a small portion remains, the plant usually cannot recover because annual weeds depend mainly on seed production rather than underground storage organs. Perennial weeds are different. When removing dandelions, docks, plantains, or other taprooted species, try to loosen the soil first. With a narrow weeding tool or hand fork. Pull slowly instead of yanking suddenly. This gives you a much better chance of removing the entire root. With creeping weeds such as bindweed or quackgrass, patience becomes essential. Follow underground runners carefully instead of simply pulling the visible shoot. Every extra section of rhizome removed reduces the plant's ability to regenerate. Here's a practical tip many experienced gardeners follow. Instead of trying to clear an entire garden in one exhausting day, spend just 10 or 15 minutes removing weeds every few days. Young weeds are dramatically easier to eliminate than mature ones. Small, frequent sessions often produce better long-term results than occasional marathon weeding. Another powerful tool is the humble garden hoe. Many gardeners think of hoeing as simply chopping weeds, but proper hoeing is much more precise. The best time to hoe is when weeds are tiny, often no more than an inch or two tall. At this stage, they have very small root systems and dry out quickly once separated from the soil. A sharp hoe used on a warm, dry, sunny day can eliminate hundreds of tiny seedlings in minutes. Timing matters here as well. If you hoe immediately before heavy rain, many disturbed weeds may simply reroot. If you hoe during cool, damp weather, some species may recover surprisingly well. Warm sunshine and dry conditions greatly increase success. Equally important is hoe depth. Deep cultivation often brings buried weed seeds back to the surface. Instead, skim just beneath the soil surface, cutting off seedlings while disturbing as little soil as possible. This preserves soil structure while reducing future germination. Now let's discuss one of the most overlooked principles in natural weed management. Never allow weeds to produce seeds. This single habit may reduce future weed problems more than almost any other technique. Many common weeds grow rapidly, and some begin producing viable seeds sooner than gardeners expect. Even if you don't have time for complete weed removal, cutting off flowers before seeds mature can dramatically slow future infestations. Think of every seed head as next year's workload. Preventing one generation from reproducing may eliminate thousands of future seedlings. Here's an astonishing example. Some individual weed species are capable of producing tens of thousands of seeds under favorable growing conditions. Fortunately, most seedlings never survive, but allowing even a few mature plants to scatter seeds year after year steadily increases the number waiting in the soil seed bank. Now let's move to one of the most effective natural weed control methods available: mulching. Many experienced gardeners consider mulch their first line of defense rather than their last. Why? Because weeds need light to germinate and grow. A properly applied mulch blocks much of that light while also helping the soil retain moisture, moderate temperature, and reduce erosion. Instead of fighting weeds after they appear, mulch prevents many of them from emerging in the first place. Different mulches suit different situations. Organic mulches gradually decompose and improve soil over time. Wood chips are excellent around trees, shrubs, berry bushes, and ornamental beds. They break down slowly, helping conserve moisture while suppressing weeds for long periods. Straw works especially well around vegetable crops such as tomatoes, peppers, squash, pumpkins, and strawberries. Clean straw forms a protective layer that limits weed germination while keeping fruit cleaner during wet weather. Shredded autumn leaves are another outstanding resource. Rather than treating fallen leaves as waste, many gardeners shred them with a mower before spreading them as mulch. Shredded leaves decompose more evenly and are less likely to mat together than whole leaves. Compost also functions as a light mulch while enriching the soil with organic matter. Although compost alone usually doesn't suppress aggressive perennial weeds as effectively as thicker mulches, it works beautifully alongside other weed management strategies. One common mistake deserves special attention. Many gardeners apply mulch too thinly. A light dusting provides very little weed suppression. Generally, a layer about 2 to 4 inches thick works much better for most organic mulches, though the ideal depth depends on the material being used. At the same time, avoid piling mulch directly against tree trunks or plant stems. Keeping mulch slightly away from the base improves air circulation and helps prevent moisture-related problems. Another inexpensive technique that organic gardeners have relied on for decades involves cardboard. Plain, uncoated cardboard placed over existing weeds creates an effective light barrier. Cover the area first, overlap the edges so sunlight cannot reach through gaps, then place compost, straw, or wood chips on top to hold everything in place and improve appearance. Over time, the cardboard gradually decomposes while earthworms help incorporate it into the soil. This method is particularly useful when creating new planting beds or converting lawn areas into gardens. However, avoid glossy printed cardboard, heavily waxed materials, or cardboard contaminated with plastic coatings. Plain brown cardboard works best. Ground cover plants provide another natural solution. Instead of leaving bare soil exposed, many gardeners intentionally fill empty spaces with low-growing ornamental or edible plants that shade the soil. Dense planting reduces the amount of sunlight reaching weed seeds while creating an attractive landscape that requires less maintenance over time. Nature dislikes empty space. If desirable plants don't occupy it, weeds often will. In the next section, we'll explore several advanced natural weed control techniques that professional organic growers frequently use, including the stale seedbed method, soil solarization, boiling water for hard surfaces, carefully targeted vinegar applications, flame weeding, and why healthy soil itself may become one of your greatest allies in reducing weeds naturally for years to come.